I'm Mr. Midnight Hollow, your terrifying host. And this is tonight's episode of The Curse Beneath the Pines. Tonight, you'll hear the horrifying story of a family hunted by a creature born from tribal legends, a cursed ritual, and a forest that never forgets. If you're already part of our community, your support means the world to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this, or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. My name is Aaron Hensley. I'm 38 years old, a former Marine, and I've spent the last 12 years of my life working as a cargo transport security guard on Interstate 5. After losing my father and going through a difficult divorce, I decided to start over. I bought a small farm in the mountains south of Eugene, Oregon, far from the city. It was the kind of place that felt forgotten by time. 5 acres of forest, a simple wooden house, a slanted old barn, and a broken fence around a field that had once been a pasture. I took my new wife, Rachel, and my 6-year-old daughter, Ellie, there. I wanted to give them a peaceful life. I wanted to redeem myself as a father. Rachel hesitated at first. She didn't like the idea of living so far from the city, but I promised everything would be fine. Ellie, like every child, was enchanted by the open spaces, the deer walking among the trees, and the absolute silence of the night. In the first few weeks, everything went smoothly. We spent our days clearing the land, fixing up the house, and trying to adjust to the new routine. The solitude was real, but also comforting. No nearby neighbors, no car noise, no city lights in the sky. But then came the first signs. One night, I woke up to the dogs barking like they were facing off with a bear. I went out with a flashlight and my father's shotgun. I didn't see anything, just the wind rustling the trees. The next day, I found the chicken coop destroyed. 2 were dead, their necks ripped off. The others were gone. Rachel thought it was a coyote. I did too, until I found the tracks in the dirt. They were footprints, large, deep, and shaped strangely, like barefoot human prints, but with elongated toes and claws. I ignored it. I didn't want to scare Rachel. But at night, the barking started again, and then silence. The next morning, the 2 dogs were dead behind the barn, their skin shredded, bones exposed, but there were no signs of a struggle, just blood and destruction. I took the bodies to the town vet, a man named Dr. Lester, a skeptical, straightforward guy. After examining the remains, he simply said, "That wasn't a coyote, and if I were you, I'd reinforce the house doors." I came back home with a weight on my chest. Rachel started talking about leaving. Ellie said she saw a hairy man outside the window at night. I thought it was just imagination, but things escalated fast. One early morning, we heard footsteps on the roof, then a noise from the porch, the wood being pressed, the windows shaking. I sat up the whole night in the living room with a shotgun on my lap. At dawn, I found claw marks on the door, and a word scratched into the wood, "Child." Rachel cried. Ellie had a fever. I spent the day reinforcing the locks, but something told me none of that would be enough. That night, before sunset, I went to the house of the only neighbor a few miles away, an old, quiet man named Silas Garvey. When I told him what was happening, he didn't ask any questions. He just looked at me and said, "Have you had the girl baptized?" What? I'm not joking. There are things in this forest that can smell a child without a protected soul. And once they catch the scent, they don't stop. I returned home with my stomach in knots. Rachel looked at me like she knew something worse was coming. The next morning, the chicken coop was empty, and in the middle of the yard, there was a trail of blood leading straight to the edge of the forest. But that wasn't what scared me most. It was what I found on the porch, one of Ellie's toys covered in mud and bitten. Rachel spent the whole day packing bags. We didn't argue. I understood. After that night, the word on the door, the dead chickens, the torn dogs, Ellie's bitten toy, like a message. She was just waiting for me to say, "Let's go." But I didn't, because something was holding me there, maybe stubborn pride, or the feeling that if we ran away, it would follow us, and I wouldn't let that thing loose in the world with my daughter's scent imprinted in its flesh. But I needed help. I went back to Silas Garvey the next day. The old man lived in a wooden cabin with windows boarded up with planks. Smoke from the stove lazily rose into the cold Oregon sky. I knocked on the door. "Come in." Silas was sharpening a long knife, the blade polished from so much use. He didn't look at me. "She's back, isn't she?" "What?" "The thing in the forest. The curse. You know what it is?" He stopped moving, finally looked up. "I saw it once, in 1974, back when the county still did night patrols with flashlights and salt rounds. A 12-year-old boy went missing on one of those trails near the lake. 2 days later, they found the body hanging from a tree, or what was left of it." Silas stood and went to a shelf, pulled out an old wrinkled map and laid it on the table. "Here." He pointed. "These are the routes nobody uses anymore. They were closed because of landslides, they said. But that wasn't it. It was fear." "Fear of what?" "Of something that hunted without being seen, that left no trail. Just shredded flesh and the smell of iron in the air." He pointed to an isolated region on the map, surrounded by pine trees and rocky slopes. "The old tribal reserve. Abandoned. But they say there's still blood in the soil." I stood there, staring at that spot on the paper. Something inside me already knew. That's where it lived, or at least where it returned to sleep. "What is it?" I asked bluntly. "An ancient spirit, a cursed one. A man who turned into a beast when he broke an old pact. Here they called it Yachewa. The whites called it werewolf." I went back home with my head spinning. Rachel was waiting for me on the porch. Ellie was sitting on the couch drawing with crayons. What she was drawing stopped me in my tracks. It was the house, and behind it, a huge hairy creature with yellow eyes. The lines were childish, but something was wrong with the proportions. Something was wrong with the teeth. And the most disturbing part, Ellie didn't seem scared in the drawing. She had drawn the monster smiling, and it was looking directly at her. "Ellie!" I knelt. "Where did you see this?" She didn't answer, just pointed to the window. Rachel squeezed my arm. "He's waiting." That night we locked all the doors. We barricaded with furniture. I placed my father's shotgun beside me and a machete on the kitchen table. Rachel slept with Ellie in the back room. I stayed in the living room. The night dragged on. At 2 a.m, I heard the first footsteps. On the porch. Slow. Heavy. I got up slowly, controlling my breathing. The footsteps came up to the door, and stopped. I stood there on the other side of the wood, listening to the sound of breathing on the other side. Then 3 slow scratches ran along the wood, as if leaving a signature. I turned the doorknob slightly, trying to open a crack. Silence. I opened a few inches and looked outside with the flashlight. There was nothing. Just the low mist on the ground and the truck's headlight illuminating the cornfield on the other side of the fence. I closed the door, but when I turned to go back to the living room, Ellie was there, standing, in the dark. "Daddy!" she whispered. He got in. For a second I was frozen. The silence in the house felt heavier than fear itself. Ellie's voice still echoed in my ears. He got in. I slowly crouched and grabbed her shoulders. Her skin was cold. "Where, Ellie?" She pointed to the hallway. I went there with the shotgun raised. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was dark, and the air felt different, denser, like someone had been breathing there for hours. I touched the doorknob of the room where Rachel was sleeping with Ellie and walked in. Rachel woke up at the sound of the door. "What's going on?" "Ellie." But when I looked back, the girl who had been with me in the hallway had disappeared. Rachel sat up in bed, alarmed. "Aaron, what's happening?" I went to the living room. Nothing. Ran to the kitchen, back door locked. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. But Ellie was gone. "Rachel, she's gone," I screamed. We searched the whole house. Nothing. Until we heard something coming from the basement. Footsteps. We went down. The wood creaked. Darkness was total. I turned on the flashlight and swept across the basement from end to end. In the corner, behind a pile of boxes, was Ellie, sitting, with her eyes closed, and whispering something I couldn't understand. I approached slowly. "Ellie." She stopped whispering and looked at me. But those weren't her eyes. There was something empty there, as if her soul had been pushed to the back and something else was looking back. "He doesn't want you, Daddy." "What?" "He wants what you love." Rachel appeared behind me, panting. When she saw Ellie, she fell to her knees. I picked her up in my arms. She was limp, unconscious. We went back to the bedroom, laid Ellie on the bed. Rachel trembled, holding her daughter's hand. "This isn't normal. This isn't just a curse. This is possession." She was right. This was more than a monster roaming the property. It was something already inside our home. Inside our daughter. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the hallway, between the bedroom and the living room, shotgun on my lap, hunting knife strapped to my leg. At every creak in the house, my body tensed up. My eyes burned, but I didn't sleep. At 3:47 a.m., I heard a sound coming from outside, a howl, low, drawn out, but different. It sounded like a human trying to imitate a wolf. Rachel heard it too. She appeared at the bedroom door, pale. That came from the cornfield. I carefully opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The air was freezing, and the fog moved slowly like it had a life of its own. I aimed the flashlight at the cornfield and walked toward the fence. At the entrance to the cornfield, the fence was open, torn, not cut. Someone had gone through with force. I entered, pushing through the tall stalks. The flashlight trembled in my hand. 20 meters in, I found something hanging from one of the stalks. A piece of cloth. A child's cloth. It was from the pajamas Ellie had worn to sleep. The noise came right after. Something heavy, moving fast through the rows of corn. I swung the flashlight. Nothing. More movement. This time, behind me. I turned again, and I saw. 2 yellow eyes glowing between the leaves. I froze. The creature approached, slowly, crouched, like a hunter ready to pounce. I managed to lift the shotgun and shoot. The shot tore through the air. A guttural roar echoed through the field. I ran, dived into the mist, escaping by inches from something that, if it caught me, I wouldn't have seen the morning. I returned home with my heart in my throat. Rachel was waiting at the door with Ellie in her arms. She was awake and smiling, but the smile wasn't hers. Ellie's smile paralyzed me more than any scream from the woods. There was a glint in her eyes that wasn't innocent nor human. It was like something was using my daughter's body as a mask. Rachel rocked her in her arms, trying to comfort her, whispering words that meant nothing. When the girl looked at me and said, in a voice deeper than she should have, "He said you'll have to choose. Either her or her." And then she slept. Rachel looked at me, panicked. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. I already knew. That morning I went to the barn. I needed to think, to breathe. The air in there was heavy, the smell of wet wood and dry feces, but there was something else. On the ground, a body. I approached, stepping slowly between the bales of hay. The body was partially covered by a burlap sack. I pulled it away. It was Scott, the local mailman. I recognized the uniform, even though it was torn and stained with blood. The face, unrecognizable. His eyes were missing, the jaw dislocated, the stomach open, with entrails exposed like an insult to humanity. I vomited in the corner. I called Rachel. When she saw it, she collapsed. We had never heard that Scott had come here. He shouldn't have been there. But he came, or was brought. And that meant the thing was hunting outside too. Choosing victims, building something. On the barn wall, clawed into the wood, was a symbol. 3 interlinked circles, with a line crossing through them all. Rachel recognized it. This is indigenous. I saw something like it in a museum in Portland. It was used to mark those who were condemned to exchange. Exchange? Soul for flesh, life for blood. It was a sacrificial seal. Rachel looked at me. Ellie. I went back to the house, grabbed the old map Silas had given me, and sat on the floor. The symbol was drawn on one of the map's edges. It marked an area at the top of the hills, beyond the old railroad detour. A place surrounded by stories, an abandoned ancient reserve. We're going there, I said. If this came from somewhere, that's where it returns to feed. Rachel hesitated. And if we don't come back? At least we won't wait for death sitting down. Rachel stayed with Ellie while I went to Silas. I found the old man sitting in a rocking chair with a shotgun on his lap. When I told him about the symbol, he simply said, "The cycle has begun. Each generation, a spirit awakens, and it needs fresh blood to continue. If it's interrupted, it gets trapped between worlds." How do you interrupt it? Silas pointed to the old cupboard in the corner. Inside there was a bag with silver ammunition, an indigenous dagger covered in runes, and a cross made of bones. You need to hit the heart while it's still in the flesh. And it has to be in the place where it all began. Before the next full moon. How much time do we have? 2 days. I went back home and prepared everything. I put Rachel and Ellie in the car with food and water and Silas's shotgun in the front seat. But we couldn't leave. Because the road was blocked. The road that led to town was covered in fallen trees, cut with precision. It didn't look like a landslide. Someone, or something, was locking us in. Rachel trembled in the passenger seat. He's hunting us like cattle. We returned home, spent the night in silence. At 2:11 a.m. we heard the sound of the kitchen window breaking. I ran with the gun, nothing. But on the sink there was something, a shoebox, bloodied. I opened it. Inside, Scott's wedding ring, a lock of hair, and a human tongue. At the bottom of the box, written in blood, "You have until tomorrow." The box stayed on the kitchen table until morning. No one could touch it again. Rachel didn't sleep. Neither did I. Ellie, on the other hand, had a peaceful night. And that might have been the most terrifying detail. The blocked road, the mutilated body in the barn, the box with human parts. It was a siege. The thing was pushing us little by little toward the outcome it wanted. And I already knew what that was, the offering of Ellie. Unable to wait, I decided to go to the place marked on the map, the ancient reserve at the top of the hills. If the creature came from there, maybe there was a way to end it there. I left Rachel and Ellie at Silas's house, the only standing structure with enough resistance, and Silas, despite his age, was still the only one who seemed to understand what we were facing. I took the car and followed the forest trails, driving until the road stopped being a road and turned into mud and roots. I parked when I couldn't go any further, continued on foot. The forest felt different in that area. The trees taller, the moss thicker, the air colder, as if nature didn't want to be disturbed there. After nearly 2 hours of climbing, I found it. A circle of black stones on the ground, covered by dry leaves and branches, as if the forest itself had tried to hide it. In the center, a charred stump, split into 4 points like a twisted cross, and around it, bones, hundreds of them, and human skulls, forgotten tombs, broken, piled without ceremony. Then came the smell. A stench of raw meat, clotted blood, and damp earth. I turned slowly. He was there, less than 10 meters away. The creature stepped out from behind a thick tree. It walked upright, but the body was deformed. Muscles bulged beneath scarred skin. Black fur covered part of the chest and shoulders. The legs bent like an animal's, but the feet were wide, with claws that sank into the ground. The arms long, ended in hands with fingers too human, but elongated, thin, and horrifying. And the face. My God, the face. It was a grotesque blend of man and beast. It had a short snout like a dog's, but the eyes were human. Blue eyes, light, staring at me with awareness. It wasn't an irrational beast. It was someone inside. The mouth opened, and it spoke. Aaron. My spine froze. It knew my name. You don't remember me, do you? The voice was scratchy, like the throat was torn from the inside. You met me in Eugene. I was a cop. You delivered a package to me once. Canned food. You smiled at me? My world collapsed. The creature took a step forward. My name was Dennis Clive. I disappeared 4 years ago. People think I died on the trail, but the truth is that I was chosen. He pointed to the circle of stones. Here I died, and here I returned. What do you want with my daughter? She has the light. I lost mine. But I can put another in its place. I need her. The forest wants her. I raised the gun, aimed at his chest. If you take one more step, I swear. He smiled. You won't shoot, because you know it won't kill me. And because you know if you kill me, another will come. One always comes. This is cyclical, Aaron. Every generation, a new body, a new soul. And your daughter is perfect. He turned around and ran into the forest, disappearing among the trees as if merging with the trunks. I ran back to Silas's house. I had to warn them. I had to protect Ellie. But when I got there, the door was busted open. The house was silent. The radio destroyed. And in the middle of the living room, Ellie, alone, sitting, smiling, and with blue eyes. Ellie? My voice came out scratchy, swallowed by the silence of the house. Every step I took toward her felt like walking on thin ice. She sat on the living room floor, legs crossed, staring straight at me. Eyes blue like the monsters in the forest. But there was something else. A twitch in her mouth. A discomfort in her face. As if that skin wasn't hers. As if there was a war going on behind those eyes. Rachel came running down the stairs. Aaron, where were you? She suddenly turned like this. Where's Silas? She hesitated. I thought he was with you. I looked at Ellie again. She blinked slowly and said in a cold voice. The old man opened the door. I ran to the basement. The hatch was broken. The chain snapped in half. And on the walls, blood. Spread out as if something had been dragged through there. But no body. Just the trail. I came back upstairs. Rachel stood frozen in the hallway. Ellie had gotten up. Mom, she said, Can I show you something? Rachel took a step back. I stepped between them. She's here, I murmured, but she's not alone. That night, the forest fell completely silent. No crickets, no wind, just the sound of our own hearts, pounding faster every second. I locked the house as best I could, piled furniture against the doors, boarded the windows with planks. Rachel stayed in the bedroom with Ellie, watching her like she expected her daughter to turn into something before her eyes. And I sat in the living room, shotgun on my lap, the rune-covered dagger at my waist, and the memory of Dennis Clive's face, or what was left of it. The creature knew we were preparing, and it would come with everything it had. It didn't take long. At 12:23 a.m., I heard the first knock. It wasn't a hit. It was a warning. Then another. On the other side of the house. And another. Above us. They were surrounding us. The glass window in the hallway shattered. Something rushed in, low, fast. I fired. A roar echoed. It wasn't the main creature. It was another. There was more than one. Rachel screamed in the bedroom. I ran, breaking the door down with my shoulder. The bedroom window was open, wind coming in. Ellie still in bed, shaking. But Rachel? Gone. Rachel! I shouted. The only answer was a sound from the forest, a muffled sob. I hugged Ellie. She was crying for real now. Those blue eyes were gone. They were hers again. Mommy, I'm going to bring her back. I promised. I hid Ellie in the closet, locked her in with the crucifix and the silver knife. I ran into the forest, following the sound. It was a dragged-out sob. Weakened. In the middle of the trees, I found a red stain on the ground. Rachel was hanging from a tree, hung by her arms tied with vines. Open wounds on her shoulders, blood running down the trunk, but alive. I tried to climb. Before I could cut the vines, I felt the air shift, and his voice came. I told you it was an exchange. I turned slowly. He was there, standing tall, intact. Dennis. But something was different now. The skin looked more human, the features less beastly. He had absorbed more life. Let her go. Take me. He smiled. I already have you. He advanced. I fired. Missed. I ran. Threw myself against the tree, climbed up, cut the vines with a knife, and caught Rachel as she fell. She fainted in my arms. He was coming. Faster now, eyes glowing, teeth bared. The creature roared. And then out of nowhere, something hit him in the chest, an arrow. I looked to the side. It was Silas, the old man, bloodied but still standing, a makeshift bow in his hands, his arm shaking. Run, Aaron. I picked Rachel up and fled down the trail. But before I disappeared into the forest, I heard the sound of flesh being torn. Silas had been reached. And what came next was a long howl of victory. Rachel slept under the effect of makeshift painkillers. I bandaged her arms with torn sheets and left a kitchen knife within her reach. I couldn't guarantee that house would protect us anymore. Not after what happened to Silas. He had died to buy us a few more hours. Hours that now counted as borrowed time. I had a choice. Wait for the final attack, or hunt it down. But first, I needed to understand what that thing was, and why Ellie. I returned to Silas's map, rummaging through the papers he kept hidden under the floorboards. Old documents, diaries, unofficial police reports. And there, among stained newspaper clippings and handwritten notes, I found the answer. Dennis Clive. The name was there. Former Eugene police officer, reported missing in 2019. Disappeared on a routine patrol in the forest near the old reserve. The same one I had been to. The search lasted 3 weeks. Nothing was found. But there was a buried detail in one of the reports. Last case, attended by Clive, involved a complaint of a pagan cult performing rituals with animal blood and tribal symbols in a federal area. The agent disappeared 2 days later. Rachel groaned awake. I ran to her. He was human, I whispered. He was corrupted, transformed. She simply nodded, eyes full of pain. Ellie, he wants her soul. Why? Because it's still pure. Because it has something he lost, and because he needs a new body. The forest, the symbol, the cycles. It was all part of an ancient ritual, and Dennis was just the new host, the shell, the flesh. The curse needed to renew itself to stay alive through blood. And now, Ellie was the vessel. Tomorrow night is the full moon, I said, standing up. The last one before the cycle closes. Rachel stared at me. And if he succeeds? Then she dies. But the body goes on, with him inside. She closed her eyes. A knot formed in my stomach. I knew she was thinking the unthinkable, killing her own daughter if it came to that. I left the house without making a sound. I needed to hunt him while there was still time. It took me 2 hours to reach the top of the hill where the old reserve was. The trail was damp, full of mud and fresh drag marks. Monstrous footprints, some so deep they split rocks. In the clearing where I last saw Dennis, I found fresh meat remains, not human, animal, but arranged as an offering. In the center of the stone circle, there was something new, an amulet, made of small bones and strands of hair. The bones were human, and the hair, blonde. Ellie's. Rage rose like acid. That's when I felt the hot breath behind me. I turned with the knife raised. Nothing. But the breathing continued. Close. All around, like the forest itself was panting. Why her? I shouted to the darkness. Silence. Why don't you take me? A sound echoed behind the trees, slithering, wet. The creature answered, because you're already corrupted. War, death, guilt. You smell like us. I closed my eyes. That wasn't a lie. Dennis appeared among the trunks, in almost human form, face raw, eyes blue. But he said, she is hope. He lunged. I fired. The bullet hit his shoulder. He fell to the side, rolling, but he didn't run. He smiled, spitting black blood. Now, you belong to me. The world went black. I woke up hours later, tied to a tree, my hands bound with vines, my mouth dry, and in front of me, a low fire. And Dennis, kneeling, and Ellie sitting next to him, asleep. The ritual begins at nightfall, he said, and you're going to watch. My head throbbed. The bonds around my wrists cut deeper with every attempt to break free. Ellie slept under a spell, wrapped in braided branches and lines of salt drawn on the ground. A tribal symbol circled her body, and Dennis looked more human than ever. But that wasn't comforting. It was pure terror. The monster had learned to use the body as a disguise. And now, he looked like someone who could talk, someone who could promise. But behind the skin, there were still fangs. There was still the curse. Do you know what she's going to become, Aaron? He asked, without looking at me. She'll inherit what I carry. She'll continue the cycle. And you'll watch. You'll live to see what happens when a father fails. I tried to loosen my wrists, ignoring the pain. Each movement was a knife slicing deeper. Blood ran down my hands, but I kept going. I had to get out. I had to pull her out of that circle. Dennis knelt beside Ellie and ran his dirt-stained fingers across her face. She won't suffer. She'll just change. The sky began to darken. The moon hadn't risen yet, but the entire forest seemed to await the exact moment. The sounds of animals went silent. The air turned colder. The smoke from the fire rose straight up, with no wind. I felt something inside me change too. Anger, hatred, fear. But above all, the memory of what Rachel had told me days earlier. You won't let her die. With the last strength I had, I pulled my arms against the bindings and felt the vine tear into my flesh. The pain was brutal but freeing. My hand slipped out, bleeding but free. I lunged at Dennis with a hoarse scream, tearing my throat. We fell together to the ground, rolling in the mud. He was stronger, much stronger. But I was a father, and there is no curse stronger than a father who must protect his daughter. I managed to stab the knife into his shoulder. He roared, his skin ripping, revealing deformed muscles underneath. But he didn't fall. He threw me aside with a blow that knocked the air out of my chest. He was transforming before my eyes. His skin split, his teeth grew, his arms stretched, his torso covered in black fur, and his eyes remained blue. The same human eyes, glowing on the face of a beast. I grabbed Silas's silver weapon, the one he had given me before dying. It had one bullet, one chance. Dennis turned to Ellie, who was beginning to wake inside the circle. The ritual was almost over. The ground around her trembled, the stones burned, and the creature began to howl. I ran to her. Dennis leaped at me. He landed on top of me, his teeth aiming for my neck, his claws slashing my chest. I screamed, my body burning. With my free hand, I pulled the gun from my waist. I aimed at what remained human in him. "Go to hell!" And I fired. The shot hit him straight in the left eye. The creature fell backward, its face exploding in blood and bone. But it still breathed, agonizing, staggering. Ellie began to scream. The tribal symbol around her caught fire by itself. The circle was closing. I ran to her, dragged her body out of the flames. The smoke blinded me. The heat of the earth rose like hell itself had opened beneath us. Dennis stood one last time. Half his face dangled, his flesh melting, but he still smiled. It doesn't end here, not with one bullet. Then, a voice came from the forest. Rachel. With Silas's dagger in her hands, she crossed the burning circle, ran to Dennis, and drove the blade straight into the monster's heart. "Get out of my daughter, you bastard." The creature let out a sound that wasn't a roar or a moan. It was something deeper, like the wail of a soul being forcibly expelled. The body convulsed. The veins turned black. The chest exploded in black smoke. And then, silence. The forest fell quiet. The fire went out. Rachel dropped to her knees. I held her, with Ellie between us. But even in that moment, I knew that wasn't the end. The clearing was bathed in silence, as if everything had died along with the creature. Dennis's body smoldered on the ground, ribs spread like claws trying to hold on to the soul. But there was no more howling, no more movement. Ellie was unconscious in my arms. Rachel bled from her shoulder but stayed alert, eyes fixed on what was left of the monster. We stayed there for long minutes, breathing deeply, waiting for something. But nothing happened. The forest slowly began to return to life. A distant rustle, a lonely bird song, a cricket. I helped Rachel to her feet, and we carried Ellie back down the trail, step by step. The path seemed darker, longer. Every shadow made us turn with the weapon in hand. But we made it. Finally. Silas was dead, but his house was still standing. We used old water barrels to clean our wounds. Rachel collapsed on a stained mattress. Ellie slept a deep, peaceful sleep. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with the shotgun between my legs and stared at the ceiling for hours. The night felt endless, but when the sun came up, I cried. It was over. I buried Silas next to the cornfield. where he used to say he heard his dead wife's voice on silent nights. Rachel helped me place a makeshift cross using broken fence pieces. He died like a real man, she said. On his feet, fighting. We stayed there one more day. Then we decided to leave. Eugene was no longer our home. The air there was rotten, even with the forest seeming at peace. But peace was a lie. On the third night, far from the city, we stopped at a roadside motel. Just a random place in Nevada. Hard bed, TV with no signal, and a silence so strong it made our ears buzz. While Rachel slept, I went to the bathroom. When I looked in the mirror, I saw it. Ellie, behind me. "Daddy!" I turned, startled, but she wasn't there. I ran back to the room. She slept deeply beside Rachel, breathing peacefully. But something was wrong. I approached. And then I saw it. The scar. On her chest, a small cut, just above her heart. The dagger hadn't struck the monster. It had struck her, or worse. He was already inside her. I stepped into the hallway trying to breathe. Dennis's words came back to me. "You'll live to see what happens when a father fails." I ran to the car, grabbed Silas's dagger, still stained with dry blood. I went back to the room, but when I opened the door, Ellie was sitting on the bed and staring at me. With blue eyes. I stood frozen in the doorway, hand trembling around the silver dagger. Ellie stared at me from the center of the bed, eyes glowing with that unnatural, intense blue, too deep for a child. She said nothing. Didn't cry. Didn't smile. Just watched me. Rachel still slept, unaware of what was happening. Or maybe, pretending. I took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath my feet. "Ellie," I whispered. "It's me. I'm your dad." She tilted her head slightly. "Why are you holding that?" she asked, pointing at the dagger. "It's to protect you." "From me?" I swallowed hard. Her voice was calm, measured, cold. "Where's my daughter?" I asked. "Where did you bury her?" She blinked slowly. "It's okay, Daddy." "I am her." "No." I took another step. She didn't back away. "You're not my daughter." She left the door open. I just came in. My hand gripped the dagger tighter. The blade shimmered under the dim lamplight. "Then get out," I whispered. The creature laughed. "It's not that simple. You killed the body, but you didn't destroy what was behind it. The spirit, the cycle. I'm part of it now." Rachel woke with the sound of the laughter. Turned her face slowly, saw Ellie sitting up, saw me with the dagger. "Aaron, what's going on?" "She's not our daughter." Rachel jumped up, stepping between me and Ellie. "No!" she screamed. "You're not touching her." Rachel listened to her voice. "Look at her eyes." Ellie smiled. "Mommy, help me." Rachel hesitated. A second, maybe two. It was enough time. Ellie leapt. The claws appeared mid-air, not a metaphor, real. Her hand transformed mid-jump, fingers stretching, nails turning into blades. Rachel fell to the ground, arms bleeding. I screamed, rushed forward with the dagger. The blade stabbed into the creature's shoulder, which writhed, roaring. Yes, roaring. There was no more disguise. The whole room trembled. Ellie, or what remained of her, writhed on the floor, half human, half beast. Fur sprouted across her body. Her skin cracked. Her eyes flickered between blue and brown. The monster hadn't died. It had only changed bodies. "You're not Ellie," I said. "She invited me," growled the voice. "She let me in. You left her alone. You let me in." Rachel crawled, bleeding, trying to reach her daughter. The beast readied for another leap. Then I remembered what Silas had said. You need to strike the heart while it's still in the flesh. I dropped the dagger, grabbed the shotgun, loaded it with the last silver bullet, and waited. The creature lunged. I fired. The bullet entered straight through the chest, tearing through Ellie's small body. The explosion was silent. There was no scream, no pain, just a breath. Like the air had been sucked from the world for a second. The body fell. The transformation vanished. And there was Ellie. Truly, no blue eyes, no claws, no monster. Just my daughter, with a hole in her chest. Dead. Rachel screamed, a scream I'll never forget. I knelt beside the body, touched her face. It was still warm. But she wasn't breathing. And then I heard a whisper, low, on my neck. The blind werewolf hunts by scent, and it already caught yours. I turned, heart in my throat. Nothing. But the room was cold, very cold, and outside, on the dirt road, footprints began forming on their own. What happened in those cursed woods is a chilling reminder that some spirits don't rest. They wait. The ritual may have ended, but the hunger in the forest still lingers. Like this video if you felt the dread creeping in as the circle closed. Comment below. Would you have made the same choice Aaron did? Share this story with someone who still believes evil needs eyes to see. And if you want to be ready when the next shadow moves, subscribe to Mr. Midnight Horror and hit the bell before something out there hits your door. I'm Mr. Midnight Hollow, your terrifying host, and tonight you're about to hear the full, chilling account of Project Olympus, the military experiment that unleashed monsters into the heart of Texas. Tonight's episode will take you deep into the abandoned labs where the nightmare began, across a city turned into a killing ground, and into the underground tunnels where the original beast still waits. If you're already part of our community, your support means the world to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this. Or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. My name is Noah Griggs. I'm a security technician in the industrial sector of a company called BioVector Labs in Houston, Texas. My job was simple: monitor cameras, check badges, and do night patrols in the silent corridors of the complex. What they did in there, I never exactly knew. But everything about that place radiated a kind of tension I could never ignore. BioVector presented itself as a pharmaceutical company, but the underground floors, protected by biometric readers and cameras with no access on the common monitors, hid something more. I saw the shipments that arrived at night: metal crates with military symbols, liquid nitrogen cylinders, containment chambers with triple reinforcement. Everything sealed, everything with federal-level security codes. Little by little, I began piecing fragments together. The lab was developing something they called Project Olympus. It was a kind of secret military experiment, an attempt at bioengineering aimed at creating enhanced soldiers. Super strength, endurance, heightened senses. The promise of a superhuman. One night, I overheard two researchers arguing outside room 7. The door was slightly open. One of them spoke with a trembling voice. The hormonal levels are out of control. Cortisol tests are 10 times above normal. It's because of the genetic activation. The lycanthropic code reacted to the implant, the other replied in a muffled tone of panic. At that moment, I knew this wasn't just some ordinary experiment. They were playing with something old, primitive, something that shouldn't have been brought back. On the next shift, I noticed that access to Wing B was blocked by 2 armed men, soldiers, not private security. And I saw, with my own eyes, when they passed by, carrying a stretcher covered by a black plastic sheet. But what made my skin crawl was the sound coming from under the cover, a harsh, heavy breathing. That thing was alive. And very strong. Noah, shut up. That's what I kept repeating to myself. Do your job. Go home at the end of the shift. But every night things got worse. The cameras showed shadows that didn't match the presence of anyone in the sector. Doors opening without alarms. And a strange smell began to spread through the underground corridors. Iron, raw meat, and something rotten. Something I couldn't explain. On a Saturday at 3:14 a.m., I received an audible alert on the monitoring room panel. Containment protocol failure. Room 9. The camera images were down. Everything was dark. I went there, not out of courage, but out of protocol. When I got to the Room 9 corridor, I saw that the armored door was ajar. There were marks on the steel, as if something had scratched the structure from the inside. Scratched with enough strength to bend metal. The corridor was dark, except for the flashing red emergency light on the ceiling. And then I saw blood, dripping from under the door. One of the guards, Sam, the youngest, appeared behind me. I raised my hand, trying to stop him from speaking. Everything was too quiet. The kind of silence that comes right before a tragedy. The emergency light flashed once more. And for less than a second, in the reflection of the broken glass on the side window, I saw something inside. Eyes. Much larger than normal. Glowing. Locked on us. And a snout. That thing wasn't human. Before I could react, something smashed through the door with a violent crack. Sam was pulled with such force that his body flew against the wall on the other side of the corridor. The impact broke his spine. I froze. Every fiber of my body screamed to run. But my legs wouldn't obey. Then came the screams. From inside the lab, one by one, the staff, the scientists. They were all being killed. But it wasn't an ordinary massacre. It was methodical, brutal, as if the thing inside was hunting. I managed to run to the emergency stairs. The cameras were down, the alarms silenced. No one came to help. The radio didn't work. I was the only one to leave that place alive that night. Hours later, when the firefighters arrived, the building was already empty. The bodies had vanished, the blood wiped away, and the building sealed off by federal authorities as a chemical accident. A lie. Since that night, I've been dreaming about those eyes. Those eyes. And I know that thing is still out there, because in my neighborhood, in the last 3 days, 4 people have disappeared. And yesterday, I found something strange at the back door of my apartment. Footprints, huge, with claws and blood. The next morning, I contacted a person I swore I'd never call again. Eli Mercer, former FBI agent, now independently investigating so-called denied cases. Events the government covered up with fabricated excuses. I met him years ago, when I worked as security at a containment base in New Mexico. He was obsessed with unauthorized military experiments, and now, I knew I needed him. We met in an abandoned parking lot near Highway 290 at a decommissioned gas station. Eli was thinner, his eyes sunken, beard unkempt. But when I described what I saw, he didn't call me crazy. He just lit a cigarette and said, "They call it Subject 47, the last survivor of Project Olympus. The others were incinerated." Incinerated? The DNA couldn't handle the process. Only he survived, but at a cost. What came out of that lab isn't human. Not even animal. It's something else. According to what Eli had discovered, this so-called Subject 47 was a former soldier named Raymond Hoyt, who had disappeared during a secret mission in the Middle East. Officially, he was dead. In reality, his body had been brought back and sent directly to BioVector as federal property. Raymond had a history of behavioral disorders and abnormal aggression. When he was reconstructed genetically, they used a DNA sample extracted from a canine fossil found in the Arctic. But the genetic material was mixed with something the scientists couldn't identify. According to leaked reports, during certain tests under extreme conditions, heat, sleep deprivation, intense pain, he would enter an altered state of consciousness. His pupils would dilate, his heart rate would double, his muscles would triple in density, his jaw would widen, his face would deform. He tore one of the doctors apart with his bare hands, like it was aluminum foil, Eli said, showing me a blurred photo from one of the reports. After that, they locked him in room 9. He never came out. Until now. I went back home not knowing what to do. My mind was spinning. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey, sat on the couch, and tried to make sense of what was happening. But before I could even bring the glass to my lips, I heard a noise in the hallway of my building. Heavy footsteps. Slowly approaching my door. I stayed silent. I heard the wood creak. Then, absolute silence. I took 2 steps toward the door, pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Then suddenly the doorknob turned, very slowly. It froze my blood. I hadn't spoken to anyone except Eli. And no one knew I was alive. Or that I had seen what I had seen. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I had, and waited. The doorknob stopped turning. 5 seconds later, I heard something dragging outside, like claws. A dry, steady sound cutting across the carpet. Then, footsteps slowly going down the stairs. I rushed to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was empty. But at the end of the carpet, there was a trail of marks. 3 deep scratches. As if something had left a message. A warning. The next morning, Eli called me. His voice was hoarse. They've activated Level 7 containment protocol. The Army is already in Houston. But no one is saying why officially. It's him. It's not just him, Eli replied hesitantly. Last night, 5 men from a tactical unit disappeared in a warehouse south of the city. They only found pieces, scattered, teeth, bone fragments, like they'd been chewed. This wasn't an accident. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Whatever had escaped the lab was moving. Fast, strategic, intelligent. That night, Eli and I decided to investigate the biovector building. Everything was sealed off, but Eli had the means. We broke in through a side entrance, using an access tunnel for the ventilation ducts. The inside of the lab seemed clean, as if nothing had happened. But the details betrayed the farce. The smell of chemical products was too strong. Sensors had been recently replaced, walls patched up in a rush. We reached Wing B. There, we found one of the central servers intact. Eli plugged in his laptop and began pulling the data. What we found in the files was enough to make my face go pale. Videos of experiments with Subject 47. He was chained, screaming, drooling, the veins in his neck bulging as if they would burst. Then, the transformation. His skin stretching, his eyes disappearing beneath deformed eyelids, bones breaking to make way for something new. And then, the most disturbing thing. A recording of the last team meeting, 3 days before the massacre. He's no longer Ray Hoyt. He's no longer human. He can smell fear. He waits for night. He knows what he's doing. The last video showed the inside of the cell, empty. Then, an automatic message flashed on the screen. Escape. Red level. Protocol inactive. The next instant, the building's emergency lights came on. A silent alarm flashed on the security room panel, and from the upper floor, we heard a dull thud. Like something huge, falling. Someone, or something, was up there, and it had sensed our presence. The metal structure of the ceiling reverberated with the sound of heavy footsteps. They weren't fast. They were slow, precise, as if they knew exactly where we were. Eli snapped his laptop shut with a dry click and stared at me. No words, just that look that said it all. Run now. We bolted out of the tech room and into the back of the decontamination wing. The emergency lights flickered irregularly, revealing for fractions of a second the long shadows cast on the walls. With every step we took, the sound above our heads grew closer, until it stopped. We froze, breathing shallow. The structure went silent. Then the ceiling exploded. A body fell before us with force, or what was left of one. It was one of the missing soldiers, his face partially ripped off, his eyes still open, frozen in terror. His neck broken at an impossible angle. Before we could react, the creature dropped down with him. Gigantic. The human shape it once had, now just a faint trace hidden under monstrous muscles. Thick black skin covered in irregular patches of fur. The legs were long and powerful, the arms disproportionate, ending in enormous claws, sharp as blades. The eyes, the same ones I had seen in the reflection of the window weeks earlier. Cold, aware. It knew what it was doing, and it liked it. It didn't think twice. It leapt at Eli, who rolled to the side just in time. The impact shattered the floor. I ran, trying to pull Eli by the arm. The creature stood up, its eyes fixed on us. "Go! Go!" Eli shouted, shoving me toward the back door. We ran through one of the maintenance tunnels until we reached the emergency exit that led to the back of the complex. Outside, the city seemed indifferent to what was happening beneath its feet. But inside me, everything had changed. Behind us, we heard the sound of metal being twisted. The emergency door had been torn off like paper. But the creature didn't come out. Not there, not yet. That night, the moon was full. The lab breakout was just the beginning of what would soon become a massacre. In less than 12 hours, the first deaths appeared on the local news, but all of them with false versions. Animal attacks, violent gangs, crimes of passion. But I knew. I saw the pattern, the marks. A young couple was torn apart inside their car parked at the Memorial Park exit. The doors ripped off, the bodies shredded. The officers who responded to the scene said they had never seen that much violence in a single attack. Another body appeared in a subway station in plain sight. A homeless man with his chest open as if he had been dissected, part of the skull missing, half his face torn off, like a trophy. He's not just killing, he's hunting, Eli said as he analyzed the points on the city map. And he's getting closer to downtown. The poorer neighborhoods were the first ones. But now, the creature was moving toward busier, more populated areas. And no one knew what it was. No one but me. And Eli. The next night, we went to an abandoned warehouse in the East Zone, where another attack had taken place. But before we got there, we heard gunfire in the distance. We were running when we saw the scene. An army team in direct confrontation with the creature. They weren't ordinary soldiers. It was a rapid response team, equipped with heavy weapons, thermal scopes, armored vehicles. But none of that worked. The creature moved with impossible speed. It knocked men down like rag dolls. One of them was torn in half, the lower half of his body flying in one direction, the upper half landing meters away. Another was thrown against a concrete pillar, his head crushed. Blood covered the walls. The screams were muffled. Everything happened so fast it didn't feel real. And then it stopped. In the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by bodies, covered in blood. And it looked straight at me. I froze. It recognized me. It knew I was there. It knew who I was. That creature had memory, and maybe a reason. Eli grabbed my arm. "We have to get out of here, now!" We ran through industrial alleys, up metal staircases, jumping across rusty rooftops. When we finally got far enough away, we saw helicopters flying over the area. It was official. The army had taken over Houston. But the creature had vanished. Again. On the way back, Eli wouldn't stop talking. About ancient wolf DNA, about hidden files, about something more. There's something bigger behind this, Noah. They knew. From the beginning. Nobody creates a monster like this without knowing what they're messing with. Before I could answer, we received an anonymous message on Eli's phone, a video. It was from inside the cell. Old. Subject 47, still partially human, staring straight at the camera. And he said, "When the moon is full, I'll be back." The file ended abruptly. At that very moment, the streetlights around us went out, all of them at once. In the silence that followed, we heard something coming from the back of the alley. A muffled sound, heavy, like big feet on wet concrete. And when we turned around, he was there. He was standing less than 20 meters away. The monstrous body, covered in coagulated blood and pieces of flesh. His eyes glowed like blades. His mouth opened, revealing rows of uneven teeth, still with human remains between them. The street was silent. Even the sounds of the city had disappeared. Eli drew his gun, a useless gesture but instinctive. "Run," I murmured. There was no time for anything else. The creature charged. We jumped over a side fence and fell into a vacant lot full of debris. Eli rolled on the ground, hit his shoulder, but got up. I ran without looking back. I knew that if I stopped, it would be over. We escaped through a narrow alley, squeezing through a hole in the wall that led to the back of a hardware store. We locked the door with a piece of wood and stayed quiet, panting, sweating cold. Outside, we heard the sound of metal being twisted. It was circling us, sniffing us out. We stayed there for hours, until everything went quiet, but we knew it was just the beginning. Within the next 48 hours, Houston descended into a silent collapse. The government declared seismic activity in the industrial area. A lie. It was a smokescreen to cover the massacres. Residents reported night sounds. People vanished in remote neighborhoods. The police were sent and they also disappeared. Our phone rang frequently. Calls from strangers, reporters, survivors, BioVector employees trying to flee. They all spoke of the same pattern. Something was cleaning up witnesses. Eli and I tracked the attacks to a common point. All the victims were connected, directly or indirectly, to the project. Former employees, suppliers, lab witnesses. It wasn't killing randomly, it was eliminating loose ends. On the fourth day at dawn, an attack took place right in downtown. A crowded restaurant. Security cameras recorded a sudden blackout. Then everything turned to chaos, screams, people running. A woman was dragged by the leg to the back of the kitchen. The recordings ended with a blurred image of the creature climbing the wall, like a shadow. The next day, the videos disappeared from the internet. A local site that had published images of the attack was taken down, its creators arrested for spreading false content. But we had already downloaded them, and we saw everything. The creature was adapting to the urban environment, entering and leaving places with precision, using underground tunnels. It was like an invisible predator, a ghost. The next night, we went to an abandoned subway station. We believed it might be hiding there. It was the only place where the Army's thermal signals couldn't reach. We went down the broken stairs, passing by graffiti-covered walls and damp corridors. The air was heavy, smelled of mold and rotten flesh. When we got to the bottom, we found something that froze our spines, a sort of nest, bones stacked in dark corners, some still with pieces of flesh, others with partially attached clothing. I recognized a police badge, a BioVector ID card, a wedding ring, everything that was left of dozens of people. In the center of the nest, there was a bizarre structure, made of human remains, wires, pieces of concrete, like an altar. A message. "He's sending a message," Eli said, his voice trembling. That's when we heard it. Not a roar, but a deep breath, very close, coming from the ceiling right above the entrance we had come through. I pointed the flashlight. He was there, hanging between the steel beams like a wild animal, his eyes fixed on us, claws buried into the concrete. And then he jumped. We leapt aside at the last second. Eli fell onto the tracks. The creature turned to him. I grabbed a rusty iron bar and hit the creature's shoulder with all I had. The sound that came next was wet. Its eyes turned to me, and then something unexpected happened. It didn't attack. It just backed off, entered a side tunnel and disappeared, not out of fear, by choice, as if it had spared us. Eli stayed silent the entire way back, but before we got in the car, he said something that haunted me. He's keeping us alive, but not as a favor. He wants us to see, he wants us to tell, or maybe lead him to the others. Hours later, we received the location of one of the main scientists from Project Olympus, a man named Dr. Halverson, hiding in a fortified apartment under army protection. We went there using Eli's contacts. The place was a fortress. But even so, it had been destroyed. Soldiers' bodies everywhere. A skull smashed against the glass, a heart ripped out and left on the table, and in the middle of the room, among blood and debris, a symbol made of bones, an irregular circle with a vertical line cutting through the center, and Dr. Halvorson's body was hanging, without skin. But carved into his chest with precision was a phrase, "I was the first, but I won't be the last." The next day, Houston entered a state of silent quarantine. It wasn't officially declared, but roadblocks started appearing. Military checkpoints popped up overnight in strategic points of the city. Helicopters flew over the most affected areas during the night. Eli received an encrypted message from a contact inside the Department of Defense. It was short, direct, and absolutely desperate. Out of control, Level 7, termination order. The government had given up on capturing it. Now, they wanted to eradicate it. There were tactical teams isolating sectors of the city, forcing evacuations due to risk of contamination. But what terrified me wasn't the army. It was the fact that even they weren't keeping up. That afternoon, an entire troop disappeared in the industrial zone near the railway cargo warehouses. 15 men, well armed, with night vision, infrared sensors, and air support. They vanished without leaving a trace. The only images recovered from the support drone showed a blur moving too fast for the human eye. Then, the signal was lost. On the ground, they found only a radio, covered in blood. That night, we went to one of the newly isolated sectors using an access badge Eli had from previous operations. What we found was what could only be described as a war zone. Destroyed cars, walls marked with claws, bullet holes in shop windows, and bodies. Many bodies, some unrecognizable, others missing parts. It looked like the creature had attacked in broad daylight, not caring about the presence of soldiers. Or worse, maybe it was testing the limits of containment. We stopped in front of a destroyed market. The door was wide open. Inside, among overturned shelves and dried blood, was something that chilled me to the bone. A broken security camera, still blinking. Eli recovered the memory card. We took it to the car and watched it on the laptop. The footage showed the attack. People shopping, children running through the aisles, And then, the creature came through the glass doors like a projectile. It didn't walk. It charged in a straight line. Direct. Precise. It ripped the head off a security guard with a single strike. Threw a woman against the wall so hard that her body burst like a balloon. Blood covered everything. But the most disturbing part was the way it stopped in the middle of the scene and looked at the camera. It knew it was being filmed. It was like a warning, as if it were saying, "Nothing will stop me." Hours later, we received a call from the army. They knew Eli had access to data no one else had. They scheduled a meeting at a mobile base set up in an abandoned hospital in the east sector of the city. We were received by a special team, tacticals, researchers, military doctors. The atmosphere was heavy. No one spoke loudly. No one smiled. Everyone was on the verge of collapse. They took us to a general, Coleman, in charge of containment. He didn't try to hide anything. He just showed us a map, covered in red dots. These are the places where the creature attacked over the last 5 days. Each dot represents at least one death, some dozens. We tried to isolate, track, corner, but it knows the terrain better than we do. Eli asked, point blank, "Is it the only one?" The general hesitated. Then he looked at me and answered, "We don't know anymore." A heavy silence fell over the room. And then he opened a new file. A video captured by a thermal drone in a remote area near a decommissioned refinery. What the video showed was clear. There were 2 creatures, one bigger than the other, but both with the same anatomy, the same movements, the same speed. One of them seemed smaller, thinner, faster. Project Olympus hadn't created one monster. It had created a bloodline, and worse, they were multiplying. That night, the base was attacked. The cameras showed the main creature approaching from the hospital's north side. No sound, no warning. It just appeared and killed. The first victim was one of the guards in the observation tower, decapitated before he could even scream. Then, the creature entered the medical wing, tearing through everything in its path. Eli and I were on the 2nd floor when we heard the screams. Chaos broke out. We ran down a corridor filled with smoke. We saw soldiers being crushed against walls. One of them was still breathing, his torso open. We ran down the emergency stairs. On the ground floor, we found the second creature. It was smaller, but the eyes were the same. And what it did in seconds was terrifying. It leapt onto one of the soldiers and buried its claws in his face, tore the skin off his head as if it were a mask. The man fell, convulsing. The creature just ignored him and kept coming toward us. And then it stopped. Less than 3 meters from us, watching, sniffing. It recognized us, maybe by instinct, maybe by something more. And then it smiled, a twisted, animal, macabre smile, as if to say, "We're just getting started." We fled the base through the back parking lot, running through the destroyed corridors as screams echoed from the upper floors. The second creature vanished as quickly as it appeared, but the carnage it left behind was enough to make one thing clear: they were playing with us. We left the hospital and hid in an abandoned warehouse in the 2nd Ward District, an old area full of vacant buildings. There, among rust, concrete, and rats, we set up our improvised shelter. Eli spent hours trying to decode the data pulled from the military drone. The pattern of the attacks formed a kind of curve, a trajectory that seemed to be heading towards something. "It's moving strategically," he said. "This isn't random. It's circling something." Circling what? Eli lifted his eyes from the screen. Sweat was running down his face. An access point to the city's underground. One of the old tunnels used before the subway expansion. The next day, we went down into the city's old maintenance ducts, using 1960s maps Eli had recovered from public records. Houston's underground is a labyrinth. Deactivated sewer tunnels, forgotten passages, corroded structures that stretch for miles. And down there, we discovered the reason for the movement. The creature had turned that place into a hunting ground. Mutilated bodies were scattered in specific spots, pinned to the walls by claws, hung on rusty wires, covered with rags, like warnings. On one of them, a name was carved into the chest, with deep cuts, Stanley R. It was the name of one of the project's generals. They were killing everyone, one by one, and leaving trails, messages. And then, we found something even worse. An underground room. It wasn't on the maps. It had been built later, in secret. Inside were powered-down computers, still functioning cooling ducts, chain marks on the floor, an improvised laboratory, and in the center of the room, another cell, empty. But that wasn't what caught our attention. It was the back wall. Taped to it was a yellowed piece of paper, written on it by hand. Subject 48, incomplete adaptation, transferred for termination, unexpected reaction, suspected transmission by fluid. We froze. Eli took the paper, read it again, then looked at me. This wasn't supposed to be just an experiment. They tried to replicate the process and failed. But now, it might be spreading. We climbed back to the surface through a maintenance ladder, emerging on a deserted avenue. The streets were eerily silent, lights flickering, sirens in the distance. Then Eli's phone rang, unknown number. He answered. For a few seconds no one spoke, just heavy breathing. Then, a voice whispered, "You're close, but you still don't understand," and hung up. The call left the air so heavy it felt like smoke. We kept walking until we reached an abandoned building where a former BioVector employee was supposedly hiding. A man named Carter, who had worked in the project's genetic engineering. We found Carter in the basement of the building, armed with an old shotgun and with a drained look. When he saw us, the gun fell to the ground. He started crying. I tried to warn them, but no one listened. That man, he begged. He screamed that he was still conscious, but they did it anyway. Subject 47? Yes. But he wasn't the only one. The others, they were injected with unstable versions of the serum. Most died, but at least 2 survived. And now, they're free. 2. It wasn't just 47 and the smaller one. The third, where is he? Carter swallowed hard. He disappeared before containment. We never knew if he completed the mutation. But the symptoms were different. He didn't turn into a monster like the others. He changed on the inside. Before we could ask more questions, we heard a noise upstairs. Heavy footsteps. Carter went pale. He's here. How did he find us? I asked, panicked. Eli replied, almost whispering, he doesn't need to find us. He senses us. We ran to the back of the basement, entering a tunnel Carter had improvised. It was tight, stinking, and led straight down to the building's foundations. Upstairs, we heard screams, the sound of flesh being torn. Carter didn't stand a chance. We kept going down, gasping for breath, adrenaline burning in our veins. The creature was hunting us with precision. It knew where to go. Every move we made felt calculated, until we reached an old compartment with corroded steel doors. And there, we found the most disturbing thing yet. VHS tapes stacked in piles, all with the same title, Reaction Subject 49. And next to the tapes, on top of a dirty stretcher, there was a surgical mask, still with fresh blood stains. The tapes were covered in dust and age, but all dated between October 2012 and March 2013, more than a decade before the first incident in Houston. Eli picked one up, read the label twice, then looked at me. Stage 3. Residual consciousness. This isn't about strength. It's about what they still kept human. We found an old device still functional, a small tube monitor hooked to a portable medical station. Eli loaded the tape. The static hiss of the old tape filled the dark basement. The image flickered, but stabilized, and what we saw changed everything. The video showed a simple cell. Inside it, a man, apparently healthy, muscular, around 30. Deep eyes, shaved head. He was chained. A researcher spoke to him from behind a bulletproof glass. "Do you remember your name?" "Raymond Hoyt." "What do you feel?" "Hunger, headache, and the moon. It calls." The video cut to another segment. Now the same man screamed in agony. Bulging veins, the bones in his arm visibly distorting under the skin. A group of technicians watched from a distance. One of them muttered, "The regeneration rate is higher than any other. But he's still in there." The tape ended. Eli put in the second one, and in it, the horror deepened. The recording showed a new patient. Very different from the first. Younger, with pale skin and opaque eyes. He didn't speak, didn't move. The file was labeled Subject 49. The scientists in the video looked tense. One of them said, "The DNA absorbed the modification completely, but the brain signals are different. There's intense activity in the prefrontal cortex, no signs of mental collapse. But he doesn't respond." The image jumped. Another cut. Now, Subject 49 was standing, staring at the camera. No claws, no apparent mutation. Just an aura of something profoundly wrong. He looked as if he could see us through the screen. And then he said something. Quiet, almost imperceptible. "The beast is me now." The tape cut. Eli turned off the monitor. We stayed in silence. They weren't just creating weapons. They were trying to awaken something ancestral, something buried in the human genetic code. Like what? Like a predator, an inner wolf, but not just physical, mental, psychological, capable of hiding, of manipulating. Subject 49 could be among us, without anyone knowing. We left there breathing heavily. Outside, the sound of the city felt distant. Houston was bleeding. The army was now acting openly, surrounding entire neighborhoods, dropping gas bombs, trying to contain something they couldn't even see. But the attacks kept happening. In a single day, 47 people were murdered in different parts of the city. Some in public places, others in their homes. In all cases, the signs were the same: torn bodies, claw marks, and missing eyes. The press silenced. The police pulled back. The city plunged into a morbid silence. We went to an abandoned school used by the army as an observation point. There, we met Sergeant Valerie Knox, one of the few who survived a direct attack from the creature. She was shaking, her face marked by cuts, her arm bandaged, but her look was the look of someone who had seen hell. They sent 12 of us. We entered a warehouse where the thermal signals showed movement. We found only one child, sitting in the corner, crying. She paused, her voice lowered. When we approached, she lifted her face. The eyes weren't human. And then she said, "He's coming for you." And in that second, he appeared. Valerie survived because she fell through an opening in the floor and passed out. When she woke up, She was surrounded by the bodies of her colleagues. Some still twitching, others unrecognizable. The creature didn't kill the child? She hesitated. I think the child was him. We left the school at the start of dawn, walking through the darkened streets. The light poles flickered. The air felt heavier, as if something was in it, silently watching. And then we saw it, a figure in the distance standing at the intersection. Human, but too still. We approached slowly. Eli drew his gun. When we got close enough, the figure turned its face. It was a teenager. Torn t-shirt, opaque eyes, but on his face, a familiar smile. The same jaw curve, the same posture. You think you can stop us? Before we could react, he ran into an alley and disappeared. And in the spot where he had stood, there were marks on the ground. Not footprints, paw prints. We received a location over the radio from one of the surviving soldiers. The creature had been seen entering the Kessler Cargo Terminal, a huge decommissioned railway warehouse in North Houston. It used to be a logistics center. Now it was nothing but rust, rats, and cracked concrete. That was where the army was setting up its ambush. We arrived shortly before midnight. The place was surrounded. 16 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, heavy weaponry, thermal launchers, armor-piercing ammunition, fragmentation bombs. Priority is neutralization. Nothing leaves alive, said the captain in charge, before sending the team forward. We stayed behind, watching the operation. The soldiers moved into formation, advancing through the empty platforms and broken tracks. The creature hadn't been seen directly, but the smell in the air gave it away. Iron, blood, rot. The soldiers spread out among the abandoned railcars. The silence was absolute. Only the sound of boots on concrete and the hum of electricity from the perimeter fences could be heard. And then, the first sign. One of the soldiers was thrown out of a railcar with inhuman force. The body spun through the air and landed on the tracks, snapping its spine on impact. Before they could react, the creature leapt from the darkness. It landed in the middle of the platoon with a silent roar. The first one to shoot had both arms torn off before he could reload. The second was split in half. A clean, brutal strike. His inside sprayed across the ground like a jet of meat and blood. The fight turned into a massacre. Bullets hit the creature's body but seemed to have no effect. The wounds closed within seconds. Its jaw opened at an unnatural angle. It hunted with pleasure. There was no rush, just method. They tried using fire, launched incendiary bombs. For a few moments it backed away, but then it came back with even more violence. One of the soldiers was dragged to the top of a loading tower. He screamed, begging for help. Everyone watched as he was thrown from above. The body hit the ground head first, breaking with a dry final crack. Eli pulled me behind a pillar. This isn't an ambush. It's a feast. 10 minutes later, only 3 soldiers were still alive. One of them ran into a container. Another tried to run, but didn't get far. The creature sank its claws into his back and lifted him like a piece of meat. Then, tore him in half vertically. In the end, it stood in the center of the terminal, covered in blood, breathing heavily, watching the bodies, one by one. And then, it looked at me. There was no doubt. It let us live, again. It wanted us to be there, as witnesses. When the creature disappeared between the rail cars, Eli and I went into the terminal to see what was left. It was worse than any seen before. Some bodies were no longer whole. Others, impaled with rebar, stuck in the ground like trophies. But the worst was at the back of the warehouse, a kind of crude altar made with human pieces, bones, heads, spines stacked together. and in the center, what seemed to be a burned journal with BioVector's seal partially visible. Eli picked it up carefully. Some pages were intact. Sections spoke of a new protocol. Incorporation of genetic material of unknown origin. Subject 47 shows high residual memory. Tests indicate possibility of instinctive replication. Recommendation, immediate termination. And further down, attention, traces of secondary mutation recorded in support staff, not directly exposed to serum. Urgent investigation. Support staff, not a patient. That meant the mutation could spread without injection, maybe through air, touch, or fluids. This is the beginning of something much bigger, Eli said. The last soldier's body fell near us with a dull thud. The head was missing. And on the skin of his chest, something had been carved with claws. One word: wait. After the massacre at the terminal, there was no longer any doubt. The army was losing. The city was on the brink of silent collapse. Authorities blocked the media, but videos leaked, blurry footage, headless bodies, claw marks on cars, walls, even on the toys of a playground. People began to flee. Those who could left Houston. But where would they go? The creature was no longer an urban legend. It was a living force, and a growing one. Eli and I knew we didn't have much time. If the mutation was spreading, it was only a matter of days before the first uncontrolled transformations began. That was when Eli proposed the unthinkable. We need to lure it. Force a response. See if it's vulnerable to something. Anything. We set up the plan in an abandoned facility on the city's outskirts. A decommissioned thermal power plant on the edge of Buffalo Bayou. Isolated, surrounded by forest. Built with metal structures and thick concrete. We would bring pieces of bodies recovered from the attacks. We would use the smell, fresh blood, human tissue. The goal was simple. Trick it. Lure it with its primitive hunting instinct. In the center of the plant's main structure, we built a reinforced compartment with steel and rebar, lined with a special alloy used in military containment. Inside, we rigged explosives with a remote trigger. If it entered, we could blow it all up. It was suicide, but it was all we had. On the night of the attack, the tension was unbearable. The blood in the air seemed to ferment. The forest around the plant was silent. No birds, no crickets, not even wind. We were alone. Or at least, that's what we thought. Eli was monitoring the thermal sensors. I was holding the remote detonator. Heart racing, hand shaking. Then, at 2:16 a.m., the alarms went off. Movement, fast, coming from the south. The cameras caught the silhouette, large, misshapen, moving like a blur between the trees. Then, it disappeared from the radar. Silence. Seconds later, the creature appeared in the center of the plant. It came in slowly, cautious, smelling the air. Its eyes were moving. The body moved like a predator standing before a trap. But it entered. Exactly where we wanted it. Eli gave me the signal. Now. I pressed the button. Nothing happened. The red light on the explosives was blinking, but they didn't detonate. Circuit failure, Eli said, pale. It cut the power. It knew. Before we could react, the creature slowly turned, dragged its claws across the steel bars, scratching them hard. The sound was dry, unbearable. Then, it smiled and walked away. No hurry, no fear. Leaving behind the trail of blood it had brought itself, because there was no body there, only bait. We had been tricked. Eli panicked. He was reprogramming the explosives, trying to activate the sensors again. That was when I heard the noise. A dull sound. Not from outside, from inside the plant. There was another one. I ran to the loading bay and saw it. Up high, hanging from the electric cables, was him. The smaller one. The second one. The same we had seen at the hospital. But now, he wasn't just watching. He came down and attacked. He jumped straight onto Eli, sinking his claws into Eli's shoulder. Eli's scream echoed through the metal structure. I tried to shoot, hit the creature's shoulder, but it just turned its face slowly and smiled. The same smile as the other one. I ran to Eli, pulled him back, and closed the metal door between us and the creature. I locked it manually. Eli was bleeding. A lot. His face twisted with pain. He scratched me, he whispered. My head spun. It couldn't be. If the documents were right, that was enough. I dragged Eli to a safe room inside the plant, locked the security door. The wound was deep. I began cleaning the blood. He was trembling. If I change, he said, breathing hard, you kill me. Now. Without hesitation. Shut up. Nothing's going to happen. But I knew it was a lie. In the middle of the night, while Eli slept, I heard something. The sound of the main door being broken down. I looked at the cameras and saw Subject 47. He had come back. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, walking in the shadows, there were two more. 3 creatures now. 3 complete mutations. And they were all coming straight for us. It was the end of the line. The 3 creatures crossed the city like murderous ghosts. Silently, without announcements, without warnings. Only blood. That morning, Houston's downtown became a killing field. The first recorded victim was a reporter. She was doing a live broadcast about possible animal attacks, when, in the middle of the report, her face froze. She looked at something off camera, and then she vanished from the video. The camera fell to the ground, and for 2 seconds the audience saw a black, muscular blur run behind her. The network cut the signal. The video was never replayed, but Eli had already recorded it. In a few hours, the city collapsed. Radio signals failed, power flickered, emergency lines went down. Police officers were killed in the streets. Ambulances stopped running. The subway shut down. People locked themselves in their homes. But it didn't help. The creatures came through the rooftops, broke through windows, climbed the walls. They were like intelligent shadows, relentless. An elementary school was attacked. 22 children, all dead. The bodies were found hanging on the playground fence, arranged in a circle. Ritual. The press, once again, silenced. Gas leak, they said, but everyone knew. It was the plague growing. Eli was getting worse. The fever wouldn't break. His pupils were beginning to dilate. His skin was sweating cold. The mutation, if real, wasn't happening like in the movies. It wasn't immediate, it was slow, and crueler for that. Take me north, he said. There's a place, an old research center. They tried to reverse it there. How do you know? I worked there, before BioVector, before everything. They studied genetic mutations in injured soldiers, denied projects, but they had reversal protocols. We left the plant before dawn, in an armored car we took from one of the abandoned convoys. The streets were empty, as if the city had been evacuated, or devoured. We passed overturned cars, shattered storefronts, bodies scattered on the sidewalks, entire families ripped from their homes. And on top of a building, we saw it, one of the creatures, sitting on the edge of the ledge, watching, like a king over a dead kingdom. On the way north, we stopped at a ruined gas station. We needed fuel. That's when we heard them, footsteps, not one, not two, many people, walking like zombies, sunken eyes, dilated pupils, Recent wounds, scratches, bites. They're changing, Eli whispered. Everyone who was exposed. They weren't people anymore. But they weren't creatures yet either. They were in between, on the threshold between consciousness and savagery. They slowly surrounded us, their gaze fixed. They didn't attack, just stared, as if waiting for an order, and it came, from the dark, a dry howl, inaudible to humans, but all the infected reacted at once. Their eyes glowed, their bodies twisted, and the attack began. We were forced to flee. We crossed entire neighborhoods under pursuit. Houses were being invaded, streetlights destroyed. Chaos was total. The government was gone. No helicopters, no support vehicles, no reinforcements. Houston was abandoned. On the radio, we picked up a single transmission. In code, code black. Point of no return. Authorization for total burn. They were going to destroy the entire city, with bombs. And even then, they knew it wouldn't be enough. We reached the abandoned research center on the city's edge, a forgotten facility between forests and old buildings. But it was occupied. Surviving soldiers, scientists, a clandestine shelter where those who knew were trying to resist. And there we discovered the final truth. Project Olympus wasn't the first. There had been one before, a prototype, Project Lycaon, an experiment conducted in 1987, based on folkloric accounts of werewolves from antiquity, genetic activation techniques, ritual mixed with science, a single survivor. Subject 0. They never found him. But the current mutation didn't come from a weapon. They came from him. The DNA used in Project Olympus came from samples found in a fossilized body in the Alps, supposedly a wolf, but with human structure. They cloned something they never understood, and in the center of the base, in a reinforced cell, there was someone, sitting, tied down, sweating, with red eyes. "Who is he?" I asked. The general who received us replied without looking. "Subject 49. He never escaped." "But then who's out there?" The general took a deep breath and said, "Subject 0 is back." The improvised base was a mausoleum of silence and tension. Scientists working under dim lights, soldiers guarding every corridor, and Subject 49 locked up, mumbling incoherent phrases about the sky, the moon, and the hunger under the skin. Eli was getting worse. The fever had taken over. The veins under his skin seemed to bulge, as if something were moving beneath. With every hour that passed, he became more distant, more aggressive, but still human. "They'll kill him if they notice," I thought, as I held his hand in that cold infirmary. "You need to see it with your own eyes," one of the researchers said, pulling me outside. He led me to a restricted room in the basement. There, they opened files, videos, medical records, cells, images of other subjects. Subject 23, death by cardiac failure after transformation attempt. Subject 31, total degeneration. Subject 35, brain death after 3 hours. Subject 47, only successful conversion. And at the end of the list, the strangest. Subject 00, no data. Classified file. Last location, Central Tunnel System. Lower level, Sector 9. That's here? Not exactly, but it's underneath here. That's when I understood. The original creature, Subject 0, had never been destroyed. It was contained, buried in the underground tunnels and forgotten. Or so they believed. We went down with a small team through the base's old tunnels. The entrance was sealed with welds and steel plates. But someone had already broken in, long ago. The ladder led to a corridor where moisture ate away at the walls. The air was thick, smell of rot, mold, and something else. dried blood. We found signs of movement, torn clothes, small bones, bare footprints, but with claws. We reached a cracked concrete chamber. In its center, a symbol painted with old blood, a circle with vertical lines crossing it, the same seen in massacre scenes. And in the corner of the chamber, something was breathing. We didn't see the face, just the eyes. They glowed in the dark, like embers. The body was folded, covered with rotten rags. The breathing was deep, constant. And then, it spoke. "I dreamed of you." Everyone stopped. The gun in my hands shook. "You climbed the stone, went down the bone, brought him to me." "Who?" I tried to ask, but my throat closed. "The new one, the one who will burn in my place, the one who carries my call." And then it laughed. "He is ready." The creature vanished into the shadows with a movement impossible to follow. Shots were fired, but hit only concrete. We returned to the surface with one thought. Eli. When I got back to the infirmary, Eli was no longer in bed. The restraints were broken. There was blood on the walls. The soldiers at the door were dead, their throats ripped out. And in the center of the room, standing under the flickering light, was Eli. His eyes were no longer human. His mouth curved into that same macabre smile I had seen before. His breathing was deep, guttural. His nails had become claws. "Eli," I whispered. He tilted his head, as if he could still hear me, and for a moment, I thought there was still something human in him. But then he spoke. "He's here!" Before I could react, the alarms went off. Subject 0 had entered the base. Chaos erupted. The lights went out. Emergency sirens screamed. The corridors were flooded with red flashes. Soldiers ran through the hallways, shooting in every direction. Screams echoed through the structure. The first to die was one of the guards in the observation tower, dragged upward. His scream was cut short by the sound of a skull cracking. The blood dripped from above like rain. Subject 0 came from the west wing, gigantic, deformed, monstrous. His claws gleamed in the emergency lights. He moved like a shadow through the walls, tearing apart anyone in his path. And Eli ran to him. For a moment, they stared at each other. Predator and prey, father and son, or maybe teacher and pupil. And then they attacked together. The massacre was absolute, not a battle, a purge. Bodies torn apart in seconds. The floor was covered in blood, the smell so strong it made me choke. I ran through the corridors trying to escape. Behind me I heard the sounds of metal being ripped apart, of bones breaking like dry branches. I saw people being dragged into the dark, still screaming. I reached the upper level, near the main exit, when I saw her. Subject 49. He had escaped from the cell, but he wasn't attacking. He was just standing there, watching me. "Run," he said. I didn't think twice. I ran out of the base through the emergency tunnel and reached the surface. The night was cold, the sky lit by the pale light of the full moon. Behind me, I heard the explosion. The army had activated the self-destruct protocol. The entire facility went up in flames. A column of fire and smoke rose to the sky, but I knew it wasn't over. From the forest, illuminated by the fire, I saw them. 2 pairs of glowing eyes, and one more behind, watching me, waiting. They didn't come closer, they just stood there, and one of them howled. Not like an animal, like something aware. A warning. I drove all night until I reached the outskirts of Dallas. I parked under a bridge and stayed there until sunrise. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My ears still ringing with the sound of tearing flesh, the smell of blood clinging to my clothes. I turned on the radio. All stations were silent. Except one. A single message, in a loop, from the emergency alert system. Evacuate the metropolitan area. Avoid night travel. Stay inside. Await further instructions. No one was saying the truth. They would never say it. But I knew. Project Olympus was just the beginning. Subject Zero was free. Eli was gone. Or worse, he was becoming one of them. And now, there are more. Multiplying, adapting, spreading. I don't know how far it will go or how long we have. But tonight, as I write this, I can hear them. Far away, but closer every minute. The howls, they are calling. And soon, they will arrive. Noah's harrowing escape from the burning facility is a grim reminder that Project Olympus didn't just create one monster. It unleashed an entire bloodline. The nightmare is far from over, and when the next full moon rises, we'll be here to witness what hunts in the dark. Like this video if you felt the terror of that final chase. Comment below which moment made your heart race the most. The warehouse massacre, Eli's transformation, or Subject Zero's return. Share this story with someone who still believes the government tells us everything. They need to know what's really prowling out there. And if you dare to survive what's coming next, subscribe to Mr. Midnight Horror and keep the bell on, so you'll be warned before the creatures come knocking. I'm Mr. Midnight Hollow, your terrifying host, and you're about to hear that story in tonight's episode of Dark Survival. Tonight, I'll take you through chilling encounters of a family hunted in their own home, a monstrous pack lurking at the edge of the forest, and the brutal fight for survival against an alpha beast that refuses to die. If you're already part of our community, your support means the world to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this, or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. I didn't want to leave Phoenix. I had a stable job, friends, a safe routine. But after my son Max was diagnosed with severe asthma, the doctors were unanimous. The desert's dry air was only making his condition worse. Then my wife Sarah found that house in Denver, Colorado, near the border of the Arapaho Reservation. A more humid place, surrounded by greenery. Apparently perfect. The offer was too tempting. The house was spacious, with 4 bedrooms, a double garage, a huge backyard, and a price below market value. It had been recently renovated, according to the realtor, who couldn't quite explain why the property had been on the market for so long. He just smiled nervously and said that the former owner had left without many instructions. It was an old house from the 1950s, with a basement that smelled of mold, walls covered by poorly applied white paint, and a constant smell of wet wood. The plumbing made noise at night, and some windows didn't close completely. Still, Sarah fell in love with the place, and Max loved the yard. Tired of arguing, I gave in. During the first week, I thought the problem was just my adaptation. Cold nights, the sound of the wind through the trees, owls screeching in the middle of the night. But there was something about that forest behind our fence that wouldn't let me rest. A kind of silence, heavy, as if something was there, breathing with the earth. One night, when taking out the trash, I noticed strange marks on the outside of the garbage can. 4 parallel scratches, long and deeply carved into the plastic lid. I figured it must be some local animal, maybe a black bear. I became more alert. 2 days later, Sarah's car hood was dented in the morning, as if something heavy had jumped on it. There were no footprints, no scratches, just the dent and a faint smell of wet earth. Sarah thought it was vandalism. I wasn't so sure. On Wednesday night, coming back from the pharmacy, I took a shortcut on Highway 74, which cut across the mountain foothills and led straight to our neighborhood. Nobody passed through there at night. Only locals knew that route. It was on that stretch, surrounded by tall pine trees and low fog, that I saw the first real sign that something was very wrong. I was going about 50 miles per hour when a figure crossed the road in front of me. I braked so hard I almost rolled the truck. The headlights illuminated for less than 2 seconds what looked like a dog, but much bigger, muscular, with dark fur and legs far too long to be natural. It stopped on the shoulder and looked at me. Its eyes reflected the light as if they were made of molten metal, and then, without warning, it simply vanished into the woods. I got home trembling, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Sarah was asleep, Max too. I took a deep breath and went inside, trying to forget. The next morning, it was there, in the backyard, sitting still. The same animal from the road, the same dark fur. It stared at me with unblinking eyes. Max was the first to see it from the window. He ran excitedly, thinking it was a lost dog. Before I could stop him, he was already opening the back door. The animal didn't attack. It simply stood up and slowly walked toward Max, stopping just inches from him. It touched its snout to his hand and then sat down again. That sent chills down my spine. Sarah was delighted. She said it was fate, that Max needed a guard dog and that one had shown up at the right time. We named him Brutus. I tried to deny it, but deep down I knew Brutus wasn't a dog. At least, not a normal one. His muscles always seemed tense. His paws, seen up close, looked more like hands covered in fur, and he never ate in front of us. He waited until midnight, when everyone was asleep, and only then touched the food. One night, I woke up to a sound coming from the living room. When I went downstairs, I found him in front of the window, staring fixedly at the forest. The fur on his neck was standing on end, and his breathing was heavy, as if he were about to attack. I approached carefully. He didn't even look at me. He just stayed there, focused on the darkness between the trees. Outside, nothing moved. No wind, no leaves, just solid darkness. And still, Brutus wouldn't look away. I could feel it too. Something was out there, something waiting. The next morning, Sarah found tracks in the backyard, large footprints in pairs, like human feet, but with claws. The police came, took photos, said it might be a bear walking on 2 legs, which is rare, but possible. The officer didn't seem to believe what he was saying. Neither did I. On Friday, we had a visit from the neighborhood caretaker, an old man named Harold, who had taken care of the houses around for decades. He brought a property map, saying he wanted to show us something. He led us to the back of the yard, near the fence that separated our lot from the forest. He pointed to the ground between the trees. There was a kind of circle made of ancient stones, covered in moss, in the middle of the tall grass. This here, he said, was here before any house was built. The old folks used to say it was a protection belt. Protector of the village, something like that? But they stopped talking about it when the developers bought the land. Sarah laughed it off, thanked him. I, on the other hand, kept staring at the circle. So did Brutus. He was growling softly, but his eyes were fixed on that spot, as if he remembered something. That night, Max woke up screaming. He said there was a big thing outside the window, that its eyes were like flashlights, and that Brutus didn't let it in. When I went to check, I found deep scratches on the wooden exterior wall, right by Max's window. They went from the top to the bottom frame, with claw marks so sharp they cut through the paint and into the insulation. Brutus was lying in the hallway, between Max's room and the back door, like a sentinel. For the first time in years, I locked every door and window in the house. And that night, with Sarah trembling beside me and Brutus fully awake in the hallway, I felt the first real wave of fear since we had moved. But it wouldn't be the last. On Sunday morning, Brutus disappeared. Sarah thought he had escaped through the backyard fence, but I knew that wasn't it. The latch was intact. None of the boards were loose. He simply vanished. Left no tracks, no footprints, no scent. Max was inconsolable. He spent the entire day on the porch with a bag of dog treats in his hands, waiting. I, on the other hand, had the feeling he had gone out to hunt. Late that afternoon, we were visited by an officer from the Department of Wildlife. His name was Deputy Collins, and he was going around the houses near the forest to warn about what he called unusual predator activity. He showed us a photo. It was the body of a deer, found torn apart 2 kilometers from our house. It didn't look like it had been killed by a normal animal. It was ripped open as if by a giant scalpel. The entrails had been removed and carefully arranged beside the body. "This isn't a bear," I said, before he finished explaining. Collins nodded slowly. "Yeah. And the tracks around the body," he paused, "are confusing. 2 legs, then 4. It doesn't make sense." Sarah didn't like the conversation. She gestured for Max to go inside and shut the front door. I stayed on the porch, looking toward the trail that led into the woods. Collins then approached, and in a lower voice added, "I've seen it all in this county for 30 years. But this smells like something you don't talk about. You know what I mean?" He glanced at the forest, as if expecting it to listen. I knew. That same night, Brutus returned. We woke up to heavy footsteps on the back porch. When I opened the door with a shotgun in hand, there he was, covered in dried blood, his front paw dragging, and a deep gash on his left flank. His ribs were exposed in a wound that looked as if it had been made with a scythe. Max cried with relief at the sight of him. Sarah tried to stop him from approaching, but Brutus didn't show aggression, just exhaustion. He lay down on the porch, breathing heavily. It took me nearly 20 minutes to clean enough of the wound and apply improvised stitches with fishing line. He let me do it all without protest, and in the end, he rested his head on my lap as if to say, "It wasn't enough. It's not over." The next day, the city came to a halt. The first human victim had appeared. A woman who lived in the upper part of Denver was found dead in her living room. Police claimed it was an animal attack, but no one explained how an animal had opened the door without forcing it, nor how the woman's spine had been removed entirely, with surgical precision. The news reports danced around it. They spoke of bear attacks, while showing photos of footprints that looked more like gorilla feet with claws. Experts gave interviews with puzzled expressions, and one even said it looked like something out of a movie. That afternoon, I got a call from Darren, our closest neighbor. A middle-aged man, Afghanistan veteran, with whom I had exchanged few words since we moved in. But that day, he was panicking. "Man, for God's sake, did you hear anything last night?" "What?" "Noises. In my garage. And my dog? My dog is gone. I found pieces of him scattered around the yard." I went over, and I confirmed it. Darren wasn't exaggerating. There were pieces of what used to be a 50-kilogram Rottweiler scattered across the grass. The head was stuck on top of a wooden stake. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood splattered as one would expect. It was as if the animal had been slaughtered with cold precision and then placed there like a trophy. "This is a warning," I said, almost without thinking. Darren looked at me, trembling. "Warning of what?" "That we are not welcome." Brutus remained lying on the living room rug for 3 days. His breathing was heavy. His eyes stayed open, alert, even when he seemed to be asleep. One of those nights, when I went to check his temperature, he turned his face and locked eyes with me. It was a human look. There was no denying it. And then he growled. Not at me, but at the window behind me. I turned, and I swear on everything holy, I saw a shadow moving between the pines, something big, moving slowly and deliberately. Sarah begged me to leave, said we could rent an apartment, move to another city, disappear. I wanted to say yes. I really did. But there was something inside me, a voice whispering, "There's no use running." The next day, we found Darren's house with the door open. He didn't answer calls, and the local police were already there. Yellow tape sealed the area. One of the officers was vomiting outside. "Did you know him?" asked one of the policemen. "He was our neighbor," I replied. "What happened?" The officer just gave me an empty stare. "You don't want to know." But I did. And that night, I found out. Brutus got up for the first time in days. He started pacing through the house, sniffing the corners as if marking territory. Then he stopped at the front door, motionless. That's when the doorbell rang. Sarah screamed. Max ran to the bedroom. I grabbed the shotgun, but Brutus moved faster, standing between me and the door. The bell rang again, long, persistent. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. When I opened the door, there was no one there, except for a headless body propped against the doorframe. Darren's body. The police arrived less than 20 minutes after we called. Sarah could barely breathe, holding Max in her arms and trembling nonstop. I took her to the bedroom and shut the door, while Brutus remained seated in front of the front door, in the exact same spot he had been when Darren's body was found. The detective in charge was named Marcus O'Neill, a robust man with a scruffy beard and eyes that looked like they had already seen the worst. When he saw the body, he didn't show shock, just looked away. "This is the work of someone, or something," he said, as he examined the clean cuts that separated the torso from the neck. "I've never seen such a precise decapitation outside of a war zone." Sarah wanted to leave town that very night. But O'Neill, almost desperately, begged us not to leave the residence. He said it was safer to stay inside the house, doors locked until he investigated more thoroughly. When Sarah asked why he was so sure of that, he looked away. I understood. He knew something he couldn't say. Later that night, Sheriff Davis, O'Neill's superior, called a meeting with the street's residents. Few showed up. 3 families had already left. The others were panicked. 2 houses had boarded up windows. There were rumors of armed people sleeping on porches. "It's not an animal," Davis said, "but it's not human either." The sentence hung in the air like a bomb. We've had similar reports before, isolated attacks, unexplained things, always near the forest reserve, always during the full moon phases. But this, he pointed to a photo of Darren's crime scene, hidden from the public. This is new. This is personal. Silence was absolute. That night, for the first time since we moved, we set up barricades. I placed furniture against doors. We hammered the windows shut. Max slept in our room. Brutus didn't move from his position for hours. He kept staring at the woods behind the house, in silence, waiting. Shortly after midnight, we heard the first noise. It wasn't banging, nor footsteps. It was something more subtle, as if something were scratching the roof with claws. Long scrapes echoed above us. Sarah started crying softly. I, with the shotgun loaded, went into the hallway. Brutus was already there, staring at the ceiling as if he could see through it. Then, a crash in the kitchen. Someone, or something, tried to break down the back door, but there were reinforced locks, iron bars, and 2 cabinets blocking the entry. The noise stopped. Minutes later, silence. Brutus remained motionless until nearly dawn. The next morning, something even more grotesque happened. One of the policemen patrolling the street disappeared. His car was found at the end of Highway 74 with no signs of struggle. But there was blood, lots of blood, splattered on the body, on the steering wheel, and on the glove compartment. Inside the trunk, what was left of the policeman, just the skin, peeled off whole, like an empty suit. Sarah went into shock. Max didn't speak for 2 days, and I started to understand. It wasn't a coincidence. All this was happening because of us. Because of the house. Because of Brutus. Detective O'Neill returned, alone, 2 days after the policeman's murder. He sat with me on the porch and, for the first time, spoke openly. You think he's protecting you, don't you? Who? He looked at Brutus, who was lying at my feet, but with one ear always alert. That thing isn't a dog, he said, nor a wolf, nor a hybrid. He's something else. I've seen similar cases up north, near Wyoming. Brutal attacks, strange marks, tracks shaped like human feet, but always with one constant, the appearance of one of them, a dog bigger than it should be, intelligent, that appears out of nowhere and disappears without explanation. O'Neill lit a cigarette and added, Someone is hunting you, and he's holding the enemy at bay. That night, Sarah packed the bags. She said she was leaving with Max, that she couldn't stand living like that anymore. I understood her. But I knew there was nowhere to run. Hours later, while she was organizing everything, we heard screams coming from the forest. Human screams, high-pitched, desperate. Brutus started trembling, but not from fear. It was rage. He turned around and ran, easily jumping the fence. He disappeared among the pines. Sarah begged me to lock the door. I obeyed. 20 minutes later, Brutus returned. He was carrying something in his mouth, a human arm. The arm fell onto the porch with a dull thud. It had been ripped off with brutality, the bones exposed and pieces of flesh hanging. The fingernails were dirty with earth, and the open veins still pulsed with fresh blood. Sarah screamed, taking Max inside and locking herself in the bedroom. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The ring on the ring finger confirmed the worst. It was the missing policeman's arm. Brutus came closer and stood by my side. His muzzle was bloody. His eyes were bloodshot, as if something inside him had snapped. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed in the hallway, shotgun on my lap, listening to every sound outside. Sarah didn't speak to me. Max just cried. The trauma was already part of our house. We were no longer a family. We were an emotional bunker. The next morning, when I finally went out to see the state of the yard, I noticed something new. Scratches on the roof. Deep, diagonal marks, made by claws too long for any local animal. They ran from one end of the roof to the other, as if something had walked on all fours over the house during the night. I went back inside, my stomach churning. That same day, I got an unexpected call. It was a man named Henry Talltree. He spoke with a strange, drawn-out accent and said he was from a local Ute community. He knew my name, he knew where I lived, and he knew Brutus was with me. We need to talk before he comes back, before it's too late. Well, no, I arranged to meet him at an old abandoned gas station 20 minutes away. Sarah didn't want me to go. She said it was a trap. But something in the old man's voice made me trust him. When I arrived, he was already waiting. A tall man, skin weathered by the sun, hair tied in a ponytail, and eyes black as pitch. He didn't smile. He just handed me an old sheet of paper with symbols drawn in red ink. This here, he said, is the map of an ancient territory. Long before cities, long before states, the land where your house was built is not ordinary. I sat down next to him, not understanding a thing. Many centuries ago, he continued, there was a creature that hunted men in the mountains, a spirit of hunger, a wolf that walked on 2 legs, devoured flesh and stole souls. Our people called it Nuntak Ga, the bone breaker. You're saying that's what's attacking us? Henry nodded. Yes, but what you call a werewolf is just one of its forms. It takes whatever shape it wants. But one thing always remains. It marks its territory, and its territory is where you live. And Brutus, what is he? Henry then told me about the Dogman. Beings born of balance, neither good nor evil. They are created to hunt predators. They appear where there is imbalance, where a creature begins to spiral out of control. Brutus was not a dog nor a wolf. He was a soldier, a protector. When you moved in, he appeared. It wasn't a coincidence. He felt the call. I went back home stunned. That night, while the cloudy sky hid the moon, we decided to sleep all in the same room, mattresses on the floor, doors locked, Brutus lying in front of the window. Sarah didn't cry anymore. Max looked like an empty shell. Shortly after midnight, we heard footsteps in the attic, louder than before, as if something very heavy was walking up there. Then a hand broke through the bedroom ceiling. Black claws, dirty with earth, ripped through the wooden boards and grabbed the ceiling fan, tearing it out. The noise was deafening. Sarah screamed. Max started to hyperventilate. Brutus threw himself against the wall, trying to climb up to the ceiling. I grabbed the shotgun and fired, but the projectile went through the ceiling and vanished. The claws disappeared right after. Silence. The next morning, we discovered that the 2 neighboring houses were empty. Doors wide open, belongings scattered, signs of struggle, bloody footprints on the ground. The city was evacuating, little by little. And we were at the center of something that was growing like a plague. By late afternoon, Sarah looked out the living room window and asked, "That there? Is that someone?" I looked too. A naked man covered in blood was standing in the middle of the street. His skin looked glued to the bones, his eyes hollow, empty. He took a step toward our house, and Brutus began to growl like never before. The naked man stood there for minutes, just watching. His bare feet stepping on the asphalt as if he felt no pain. His skin was greenish, covered in open wounds and bruises, and his bones seemed to jut out of the thin flesh. He took another step, and another. Brutus was standing, his body completely tense, teeth bared, eyes fixed on the intruder. "He's coming here," Sarah whispered, backing away with Max. I grabbed the shotgun and stood in the doorway. Just a few yards away, the man stopped. His head slowly tilted to the side, as if analyzing the house. And then he began to contort. The transformation was brutal. The sound of bones realigning was almost audible. The legs snapped backward, the arms stretched. The skin began to tear as dark fur sprouted, and the eyes, once empty, gained a predatory yellow glow. The creature in front of us was no longer human. The werewolf was lurking. I ran to lock everything. Sarah took Max to the basement and locked the door with a wooden beam. Brutus stayed by my side, growling furiously. I knew that if the monster crossed the fence line, everything would change. And it did. I jumped aside as the front window exploded. The monster crashed through the glass with its entire body, landing in the middle of the living room. It was gigantic, muscles bulging beneath furred, scarred skin. The face was an abomination. Pointed snout, blade-like teeth, eyes burning with hate. Brutus attacked first. He leaped at the werewolf, the 2 bodies colliding with such force they fell on the dining table, shattering it. The fight was silent but intense, teeth clashing, claws trying to pierce, bodies slamming against furniture. I tried to help, but there was no space. It was like watching 2 war tanks collide in slow motion. The werewolf shoved Brutus against the wall with a violent blow. Brutus fell, but rolled back to face the creature again. The fight went on. But now, there were noises outside too. I went to the door and peeked. 2 other werewolves were in the yard. Not as big as the first one, but they looked ready to attack. They were circling the house, sniffing, searching for weak spots. The siege had begun. I ran back inside, shouting to Sarah, "It's not just one! There are more outside!" She didn't answer. She was locked in the basement with Max. I grabbed a flashlight and my father's hunting rifle from the tool closet. I returned to the living room just in time to see Brutus tear off a piece of the werewolf's ear with his teeth. The creature howled and threw him against the bookcase, which collapsed with the impact. There was no way we could win them all like this. I ran to the basement. "Sarah, open up quickly!" She unlatched the beam and let me in with Brutus, who was limping. I locked the door behind us and we all breathed together in the dim light. Max was trembling, curled up in a corner. Sarah tried to calm him down. Brutus lay down, bleeding from several places, but his eyes were still alert. He hadn't given up. The noise above us was constant. Footsteps, thuds, furniture breaking. They were ransacking the house. "What are we going to do?" Sarah whispered. "We're not getting out alive." I wanted to lie, to say yes, that we would be fine. But before I could answer, the basement hatch began to creak. Brutus jumped to his feet. Above, one of the creatures was trying to force the basement entrance. The wood was cracking. I grabbed the rifle. Sarah pulled Max back, pressing against the wall. Brutus positioned himself between us and the stairs. The hatch gave way, opening a gap, and a monstrous hand reached through, trying to grab something. Brutus leapt, biting the hand and pulling with all his strength. The howl of pain that echoed through the house was dry, distant. But it didn't stop there. Another hand appeared, this time accompanied by yellow eyes. The werewolf stuck its head through the opening, baring its teeth. I fired the rifle. The impact hit the creature in the face, but didn't knock it down. It recoiled only for a second, enough for Brutus to lunge up the stairs and out to face it again. I stood staring at the hole in the basement ceiling, listening to the fight happening upstairs. Then, something even worse happened. From the dark corner of the basement, fresh footprints appeared on the dirt floor, as if someone, or something, was already down there with us. Sarah looked at me, pale. "There's something here. With us." And Max, for the first time in hours, spoke. "He's already inside." For a moment, everything stopped. No sound came from upstairs. The silence stretched like an invisible pressure in the basement. Max's eyes were wide, pointing to the back of the darkness. I turned the flashlight toward the footprints. They hadn't been there seconds ago. They started just a few feet from us, freshly formed in the packed dirt, and led to a pile of boxes covered with a tarp. "Get out of here," I whispered to Sarah. "Take Max and hide behind the cabinet. Go." She obeyed without arguing. I aimed the rifle at the boxes, finger on the trigger. The flashlight trembled in my hand, but I kept moving forward slowly. More footprints, fresh, heavy. They were of deformed human feet, with claws instead of toes. And then, when I was just 2 steps from the boxes, I felt something breathing in the dark. A massive presence. Before I could react, the boxes exploded to the sides and something leapt from them. A third werewolf. Smaller than the first, but quicker. It fell on top of me, knocking the flashlight away. Darkness swallowed us. The weight was unbearable. It pinned me to the ground, drooling hot blood onto my face. The stench was indescribable. Rotting flesh, wet fur, and something like sulfur. Claws tried to reach my neck. I fought with everything I had, but it was much stronger. Then I heard the roar. Brutus came through the basement hatch, diving onto the monster with absolute fury. The two rolled across the basement floor, tearing, biting, ripping pieces off each other. The sound of the fight was grotesque. The snap of tearing flesh, bones breaking, the dull thud of bodies colliding. I ran to Sarah and Max, pulling them farther back. The darkness made everything harder. I could barely see where they were. I grabbed a spare flashlight and shone it on the two beasts. Brutus was underneath, bleeding badly, but he didn't let go of the enemy's neck. His fangs were buried deep in the creature's jugular, which struggled violently. With one final movement, Brutus pulled so hard that the sound that followed was dry. The sound of a trachea being torn out. The creature collapsed. Dead. The basement went silent. Brutus staggered toward us, leaving a dark trail on the ground. His body was shaking. One of his eyes was swollen shut from a deep wound, but he was still alive. Sarah was crying softly. Max was in shock. We dragged the creature's body outside into the yard. Burying it was impossible, so we covered it with tarps. It was naked again, back in human form. A teenager. Someone we didn't know. No documents, no identity. The next day, Henry came to visit. He arrived unannounced, driving an old mud-covered pickup truck. He carried a leather backpack and eyes that looked even more tired than last time. "You saw a pack," he said. "3 of them." "4," I replied. "One was already in the basement when the others broke in." He nodded. "This is worse than I thought. They're organized. This doesn't happen by accident." Sarah appeared at the door with Max in her arms. "Why are they doing this to us?" Henry looked at her with sorrow. "Because you have something they want." Brutus. The old man sat with us and explained what until then could only be considered a legend. Decades ago, a pack of werewolves broke an ancient balance pact. They began hunting indiscriminately, killing for pleasure, not hunger. They were led by a rogue alpha, known to the Ute as Takakun, the spirit bleeder. This alpha was banished to the Rocky Mountains. But exile wasn't the end. It was the beginning of building an army. "You killed his pups," Henry said. "And now he'll come personally. He'll want to finish what he started." "What do we do?" I asked. Henry opened the backpack and took out a dagger forged with indigenous silver, wrapped in leather and tribal engravings. He handed it to me. "When he comes, this is the only way." "And Brutus?" "He won't be able to face the Alpha alone. He's too wounded. But if he can hold him long enough, you can finish it." I looked at the dagger, feeling the real weight of responsibility. Brutus was lying on the porch, his body covered in new scars. He looked at us, and something told me that he knew too. That night, Sarah stayed silent. Max slept holding her. And I sat next to Brutus, dagger in hand, waiting for the sound that had already begun to echo in the distance. A howl, long, dense, cold. The leader was coming. The howl lasted long seconds. It wasn't like the previous ones, desperate, angry, or hungry. It was controlled, a declaration, a warning that the real threat was on its way. Henry left that same night, said he couldn't stay, that this kind of war was fought between predators and the chosen ones, that, if we survived, he'd come back to collect what was left. Sarah looked at me as if this was the end, and maybe it was. At dawn, the sky closed completely. No stars, no sound. The forest trees were still. No wind, no life. The silence before death. Brutus stood up on his own. His paws were still bleeding, muscles tight from barely healed wounds. But his eyes were those of an animal ready to die. "He's coming, isn't he?" I asked. Brutus looked at me. I knew the answer. I locked Sarah and Max in the basement, this time with the dagger in my hands, not the rifle. Silver was the only effective weapon now. I went through the house, gathering anything that could serve as a trap. I poured motor oil on the hallway floor, stretched wires with nails across the door frames. Everything seemed useless, But I needed to slow him down, give Brutus the time he needed. When the first impact came, the whole house shook. It wasn't through the door, it was through the roof. Something huge landed on it, crushing part of the structure. Tiles flew, beams snapped, and then silence. Brutus stood in the center of the living room, his chest heaving, his jaw clenched. The kitchen ceiling caved in completely. He came in through the top, the Alpha. The creature that appeared wasn't just a werewolf, it was an abomination, over 8 feet tall, covered in thick fur black as burnt coal. The skin under the fur was gray, scarred. Its eyes weren't just yellow, they were red, and glowed with ancestral hatred. The claws on its hands were as big as butcher knives. He didn't roar, he didn't charge, he watched. And then, in a movement impossible for a body that size, he jumped at Brutus. The impact was brutal. Brutus flew against the wall, cracking the wood. Blood immediately dripped from his mouth, but he got up, and he charged. The battle began without a sound, but with violence. The Alpha was faster, stronger. Every blow made Brutus slower, more wounded. He tried to bite, to strike weak spots, but the monster seemed to anticipate every move, as if he had fought hundreds of others before. The fight raged through the house. They tore down walls, furniture, shattered windows. The floor was covered in blood and splinters of wood. I tried to help. I got close with the dagger, but the Alpha saw me and ignored me. He knew I wasn't the threat. Brutus was. Sarah screamed from the basement. Max cried. I couldn't do anything. Brutus tried to sink his teeth into the Alpha's throat, but the creature grabbed him by the neck and threw him with such force that Brutus's body went through the living room wall, landing on the porch. He didn't move anymore. I thought it was over. The Alpha turned toward me, slowly, and walked, step by step, getting closer, red eyes burning, breath heavy. I grabbed the dagger. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold it. He came. Just a few feet away, he stopped. Not because of me, but because Brutus got up, staggering, covered in blood. One eye shut, one of his paws dragging, but he came, and attacked from behind. He leaped onto the Alpha, sinking his teeth into the creature's shoulder, tearing, ripping flesh. The Alpha roared. This time, yes, he roared. He turned, trying to shake him off, but Brutus wouldn't let go. This was the moment. I ran, with everything I had, and drove the dagger into the monster's chest. The blade went into the hilt. The Alpha hit me with a blow that threw me against the kitchen wall. I felt my spine crack. The pain was immediate, but I didn't pass out. I saw the monster writhing, screaming without making a sound. Brutus pushed him against the wall, pinning him, while the dagger melted his flesh from the inside. The smell was acidic, like burning iron. The flesh on the creature's chest began to bubble, as if being cooked from within. The Alpha fell to his knees, and then, face down, dead. Brutus fell beside him. I crawled to him, touched his head. He was still breathing. You did it, boy. You won. But he didn't react, and in that devastating silence, one last question hung over me. What if he wasn't the only one? The Alpha's body remained on the floor for hours, shrinking, slowly melting, as if death itself was afraid to take something like that away. The flesh turned into a black mass, and the stench filled the house. Brutus lay beside him, motionless but alive. Each breath was a struggle. I sat next to him, pressing his wounds as best I could, muttering words I didn't even understand. Words of despair, gratitude, fear. Sarah and Max came out of the basement at dawn. Max ran to Brutus, hugging his neck. The old warrior licked the boy's face, closing his eyes. It was the most he could do. Hours later, Henry returned. As promised, he came in without a word, looked at the body that was no longer a wolf. It was a man, an ordinary-looking man, naked, chest ripped inside out, eyes still wide open. The Alpha. Henry just nodded, as if he already expected that. He walked to Brutus and knelt down, ran a hand over his head, in silence. "Will he survive?" I asked. Henry didn't answer right away. Only after a few seconds. "The body may endure, but his soul is already elsewhere. He did what he needed to do, fulfilled the cycle." We stayed silent for a long time. Sarah was cleaning what she could in the house. Max stayed with Brutus, never leaving his side. And I kept looking out the window, toward the forest, waiting for more. But no one came. The city returned to normal in the following weeks, as if nothing had happened. The bodies disappeared. The police said nothing, no reports, no formal investigation, just silence. And we learned to live with it. The house was repaired. We painted the walls. I replaced the windows. Sarah went back to working remotely. Max went back to school. But the trauma never went away. No one talks about what happened, not even among ourselves. Brutus survived, but he is no longer the same. His fur never grew back over the scars. One of his hind legs drags when he walks. He doesn't run, doesn't play, doesn't howl. He just watches, in silence. Always watching. And me? I stayed. I never left that house, never sold it, never rented it. I remain, because someone has to stay. Someone has to watch. Brutus can't fight like before anymore, so I'm the one who carries the dagger now. In the garage, behind a wooden panel, I keep a box locked with the Ute symbol carved by hand. Inside, the dagger. The silver weapon, still stained with the Alpha's blood. Still warm sometimes, as if it remembers. And on new moon nights, the forest breathes differently again. There are no howls, but there are footsteps and smell. And something very old. Watching. Henry warned me before leaving. Killing the Alpha doesn't destroy the pack. It only scatters the survivors. Maybe they're reorganizing. Maybe they're lurking, waiting for new leadership. Or maybe a new Alpha has already been born. And every night before bed, I put Max down, look at Brutus lying at the door, and say, if they come back, we're ready. But I know, deep down, I know no one is ready. Brutus's battle in Colorado is a grim reminder that some houses hide more than just memories. They guard ancient predators waiting to return. The reign of the slain Alpha may be over, but the pack still lingers in the shadows. And we'll be here when the next nightmare begins. Like this video if you felt the terror of that final fight. Comment below which moment shook you the most inside that cursed house. Share it with someone who still believes the woods are safe after dark. And above all, if your courage hasn't failed yet, subscribe to Mr. Midnight Horror and ring the bell so the next howl in the night doesn't catch you alone.